Washington's effective war against the global South, based on modeling studies published in The Lancet and other research throughout 2025 to 2026. The withdrawal of the United States from the World Health Organization, WHO, and the cancellation of United States Agency for International Development, USAID, programs is expected to lead to a massive international humanitarian crisis. In the absence of countervailing forces, it will be one of the largest disruptions to global health in modern history, reversing decades of progress in reducing infectious diseases. Modeling suggests that continued cuts to USAID and associated global health programs could result in over 14.1 million additional all-age deaths globally. Over 4.5 million children under the age of 5 are projected to die due to the loss of health services, nutrition support, and vaccine programs by 2030. Specific models tracking the 90-day USAID funding pause in early 2025 estimated that roughly 757,000 people died in the first year as a result of these cuts, with the majority being children. Worse, these cuts will virtually ensure weakened pandemic surveillance. Effectively, it is war against the poorest, youngest, and most vulnerable in the global South. Africa and Asia are expected to bear the brunt of the impact due to heavy reliance on U.S. aid for HIV/AIDS treatment, malaria control, and maternal health. The suspension of humanitarian aid has impacted food security, leading to increased malnutrition, particularly in areas like Congo, Somalia, and Yemen. And as the cost of health services has shifted to individuals in many developing nations, poverty is on the rise. Israeli violations of international law. As of January 2026, Israel is accused of violating several core tenets of international law through its military campaign and the ongoing attempt to dismantle UNRWA. The Fourth Geneva Convention, according to Duty of Care, Articles 55 and 56, as the occupying power, Israel is legally obligated to ensure the food and medical supplies of the civilian population to the fullest extent of the means available. According to Facilitation of Relief, Article 59, Israel must facilitate relief schemes for the occupied population. In October 2025, the ICJ ruled that Israel's ban on UNRWA had already violated this obligation, as the agency is an indispensable provider that cannot be replaced on short notice. The UN Charter, in view of diplomatic immunity, Article 105, the demolition of UNRWA's East Jerusalem headquarters has been cited as a blatant violation of the inviolability of UN premises and assets. Furthermore, Duty of Cooperation, Article 2, deems that member states must give the UN every assistance in its actions. The ICJ found Israel is not entitled to unilaterally decide on the presence of UN entities in the occupied Palestinian territory. International Humanitarian Law, IHL. In view of proportionality and distinction, legal experts argue that Israel's destruction of nearly 78% of Gaza's structures and 94% of its hospitals is foreseeably excessive and violates the principle of proportionality in self-defense, jus ad bellum. Furthermore, Israel's use of starvation as a weapon has led the ICJ and UN experts to conclude that blocking UNRWA and other aid has resulted in an engineered famine, violating the prohibition of using starvation as a method of warfare. U.S. violations of international law. The United States, as its primary ally, also faces intensifying legal challenges for alleged complicity and failure to prevent these violations of international law. Complicity and failure to prevent genocide. Under the 1948 Genocide Convention, all signatories have a legal duty to prevent genocide. Recent lawsuits, e.g., Taxpayers Against Genocide, argue that the U.S. has directly contributed to atrocities through unconditional military funding and diplomatic cover. Duty to ensure respect for IHL. Common Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions requires states to ensure respect for the treaties. Critics argue the U.S. violates this by continuing to supply weapons used in apparent violations of IHL. Violation of domestic statutes, U.S. law. Section 629 of the Foreign Assistance Act prohibits aid to countries that restrict the delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. Organizations like Human Rights Watch have formally called for the suspension of aid under this law. In turn, the Leahy Law prohibits aid to foreign military units that commit gross violations of human rights, GVHR. The U.S. is accused of continuing aid to Israeli units with documented unremedied abuses. Even the newly established Board of Peace, BOP, led by President Trump, has already come under fire for potentially violating the right to self-determination. By planning a Gazan Riviera without consulting the local population, critics argue the U.S. is entrenching external control in violation of Palestinian sovereignty. What we are witnessing, from Gaza to Venezuela and Greenland, is a progressive crumbling of the international order consolidated by the U.S. and its Western allies after 1945. It is an effort at might makes right hegemony. Masquerading as a rules-based order, it seeks to undermine international law. What happens in Gaza today will happen elsewhere tomorrow.